Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Pentagon Force Protection Agency's Women's Equality Day observance. We have speakers with us today from the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial, as well as from within our own agency. We hope you find today's celebration enjoyable and informative. To our distinguished guests in person and virtually, thank you for joining us today. Please stand for the arrival of the official party, followed by the playing of the national anthem and the invocation delivered by PIFPA's Chris Lehman.
Let's pray. Lord, I just thank you so much for this time. Thank you for the organizers that put this together, for those here with us. Just pray for this event, that it goes smoothly and is glorifying to you, Lord. Lord, you're clear in your word that you created man and woman in your image. And just by your grace, Lord, this country has chosen to celebrate this day and bring women to an equal standing as well in this country. And we're just thankful so much for the accomplishments, the achievements, just the amazing things that this country's been blessed with through women and their achievements. And we just, again, pray for this time that it just glorifies you, and we just thank you all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, please be seated. I am pleased to introduce the Pentagon Force Protection Agency's Executive Director for Law Enforcement, Mr. Chris Bargery, the Chief of Pentagon Police, Woodrow Kusse, the former CEO of the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial, Ms. Pat Depew-Worth. In 1971, New York Representative Bella Abzug, also known as Battling Bella, championed the bill that would designate August 26th as Women's Equality Day. Just 2 years later, the bill was passed by Congress. The observance of Women's Equality Day not only commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment, but also calls attention to women's continuing efforts to obtain the full rights and privileges, public or private, legal or institutional, which are available to male citizens of the United States. We celebrate Women's Equality Day by acknowledging the trailblazers for decades of contributions, women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Ida B. Wells, and Susan B. Anthony. These women and so many others fought peacefully for full equality. Today, we also celebrate the women of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency. Your daily contributions to the PFPA mission of protecting those who protect our nation are integral to the agency's success, and they are valued. You are valued. The very presence of professional women in this auditorium is a testament to the equality movement, which began over a century ago and continues today. Would all of the women in the audience please stand? Now for our first speaker. Ms. Pat Depew-Worth is an internationally recognized, award-winning business leader who has 40 years of corporate and entrepreneurial experience. Since the 1970s, she has served in various professional capacities while continuously volunteering and working for nonprofit organizations. Almost a decade ago, Ms. Worth was led to fully follow her passion by becoming a certified nonprofit consultant. She served as the CEO of the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial Association, which was created to build the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial. Her mission is to educate, inspire, and empower present and future generations to continue the quest for liberty, freedom, and equality. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Pat Depew-Worth.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to do today, hopefully, is to share some information with you about the suffrage movement. My program is called The Best Kept Secret in American History. And that's because you won't find very much information in any of our academic school books about the suffrage movement, which is quite amazing when you consider that at the end of the day, when the 19th Amendment passed, it was the greatest expansion of democracy in a single day that our country had ever seen, without a bullet being shot, without any violence at all. For that not to be taught in school seems pretty amazing to me, but I don't write the school books, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of these women, and I hope that you'll enjoy my talk. So the first people that I would like to introduce you to are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. These two women originally were abolitionists, and many women who got into the suffrage movement started in the abolitionist movement, fighting against slavery. These two women were sent to England to represent the United States at the World Anti-Slavery Convention. So they traveled across the ocean in 1840, and they got there, and when it was time for them to participate, they were official delegates of the United States. They were told that because they were women, that indeed they could not participate in the program. Not only that, they couldn't even be in the room with the people that were doing the program. They put a curtain up, and they were allowed to sit behind the curtain, but they were told if they so much as muttered a sound, they would be completely removed from the premises. So that didn't sit really well with these two women. I don't think it would have sat really well with me if I had traveled on one of those ships back in the day to go to England and fight the good fight. And so 8 years later, these women held the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. It was a hot July day when this two-day convention started in 1848. And the result of that two-day convention was a document that was called the Declaration of Sentiments, and it was based on the Declaration of Independence. And what it set out were the things that women wanted. If they were married, they were owned by their husbands. If they worked, they didn't get paid. If they got divorced, they didn't get their children. And the list went on and on. And so this declaration set out all the things that these women wanted to have. And it was also decided that they were interested in the right to vote. That was controversial. So at the end of the 2 days, they voted on each one of these things that the women had requested. And everything was unanimously approved except the idea of enfranchisement for women. It passed by a majority, but everybody wasn't sure that that was such a good idea. And there were some women throughout the entire suffrage movement who didn't really care whether they got the vote or not. You know, their husbands could vote for them, their fathers could vote for them, their brothers could vote for them, so they weren't really too terribly concerned about it, but many women were, and this went all the way back to Abigail Adams when John was on his way to write the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, and she said, "Remember the ladies." Well, the ladies weren't remembered in the Declaration of Independence, nor were they ever remembered in our Constitution either. So there was a way to go, that women had to try to convince people that it was okay for them to have a voice in their government. Now, this is somebody that you should all recognize. And this is the one suffragist when we're talking about suffragists that everybody has heard of, Susan B. Anthony. And indeed, she was a remarkable woman. Her father was a Quaker, and the Quakers tended to be more progressive with their women and allowed their women to participate in things. Susan B. Anthony dedicated her entire life to fighting for suffrage for women, and she went all over the country doing that. She was from Rochester, New York. And she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott after the Seneca Falls Convention, and they became very good friends. And they worked together for the remainder of their lives trying to secure suffrage for all women across the country. One of the things that happened with Susan, because she just kind of didn't want to take no for an answer, in 1872 she marched into a polling place in New York for a presidential election, and she proceeded to vote. She was immediately arrested. She was taken to the magistrate at the time, and he told her that she was found guilty of voting, and she wasn't supposed to have done that. And did she have anything she wanted to say? Well, that was really not a good thing to have asked Susan B. Anthony, because she had a lot to say. He could not wait for her to leave his courtroom and be on her way, because she had a lot to say about women's rights. And so she didn't pay the fine that she was assessed. However, when President Trump was in office, he commuted her sentence so that it was wiped off the books, that she still didn't have this hanging over her head. Now, I'm not entirely sure that Susan really wanted that to happen, but nonetheless, that's what he had done in good faith, for sure. The next woman that I would like to introduce you to is Carrie Chapman Catt. She was a leader of the American Women's Suffrage Association, and throughout the suffrage movement, there were a number of different associations. Sometimes they merged and they separated and so forth, but there were women working together for years. Her strategy for getting the vote was to do it state by state. Our Constitution allows the states are able to oversee what goes on in each of their states. And so her strategy was for women to get the vote state by state. And in fact, in 1920, when the 19th Amendment passed, there were 15 states that did allow women to vote. They were all west of the Mississippi River. There was a lot more progressive thinking on the other side of the Mississippi River, for sure. And the legacy for Carrie Chapman Catt was that she was the founder of the League of Women Voters, which is still very active in today's society. It is a nonpartisan group, and their whole purpose is to ensure that people want to vote, know how to do it, where to do it, who's running, and that sort of thing. Next, I would like to introduce you to a very different kind of suffragist leader. Her name is Alice Paul. She was from New Jersey. She was also a Quaker, and her strategy was very different from Carrie Chapman Catt on how women should get the vote. Her sole strategy was that we needed to have an amendment to the Constitution. This state-by-state stuff was okay, but she said without an amendment, women in the South will never get the vote. Well, boy, was she right, because not every state ratified the 19th Amendment in 1920. And in fact, Virginia never ratified the 19th Amendment until 1952. Oh, but we weren't the last. Mississippi was the last, and Mississippi did not ratify the 19th Amendment until 1983. Alice had learned tactics about suffrage when she spent some time in England, and her organization was considered militant. Well, what does that mean? Did they engage in violence? No, they didn't. What militant meant was they peacefully picketed the White House in 1917, and that was the first time that anyone ever picketed the White House in our country, so it was a really, really big deal. She was the author of the Equal Rights Amendment, which is as of today still has not been ratified, although the 38 requisite states that needed to ratify it have done so, but there's controversy over it, but it still hasn't passed. Next, I want to introduce you to an Hispanic suffragist by the name of Adelina Otero Warren. And why am I introducing you to her? Because I want you to know that it wasn't just white women that were trying to get the vote. Adelina was an educator in New Mexico, and in 1922, she ran for the House of Representatives from her state, until word leaked out that when she had been very young and married, she subsequently got divorced. Well, that was the end of any political career she was ever going to have. So she just maintained her activity in the education environment, and that's where she put all of her efforts toward. Next, I would like to introduce you to somebody that's different than what I have in my script here. Okay, so I go back then. There we go. To Dr. Mabel Ping Ha Lee, a Chinese woman. Now, when she got involved in the suffrage movement, she was too young to vote, and because she was not a citizen, she could not vote. But nonetheless, she felt that it was really important that at some point, that inevitably women would get the vote. And so she was involved with parades in New York City. Her father was a Baptist minister, and she also became a Baptist minister and was held in very high regard. Next is a Polish-Jewish immigrant by the name of Rose Winslow that I want to introduce you to. She lived in New York as well. She picketed the White House in 1917, and she was jailed there at that same time. Many women that were jailed in 1917 for picketing the White House went on hunger strikes because their conditions were horrible. They were given urine-soaked mattresses, vomit-encrusted blankets, maggot-infested food to eat. It was pretty horrific. And they were also beaten and tortured. And if they went on hunger strikes, they were force-fed. And force-feeding is a type of torture as well. So women who were fighting for the vote were not just sitting around having tea and talking about it. They were taking action. This is a favorite group of mine that I want to introduce you to. These are the Delta Sigma Theta sorority women that founded the sorority in 1913. Alice Paul staged the first women's rights parade in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd, 1913. There were 9,000 women from all over the world who came to participate in this parade. Now, Alice was quite a strategist, and she staged this parade on the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. So does that ring a bell? And having women's parades around inaugurations. She was, went to the DC police and said there could possibly be some rioting that goes on, and we hope that you're going to protect these women. Well, this is what happened. There were 500,000 people that had come to Washington for the inauguration, and the vast majority of them were men. And what do you suppose these men were doing downtown while they were waiting? And the parade began. Well, they were throwing back a few, and they got quite inebriated, and they got quite violent. And this turned very violent. Over 100 women were assaulted, they were beaten, they were spit on, they had things thrown at them, and the DC police refused to help, and they had to call in the cavalry from Fort Myer to break it up. But I'm pleased to tell you that this parade was down Pennsylvania Avenue, and for those of you who are familiar with Pennsylvania Avenue, it is really wide, so you can march 12 abreast easy or even more than that. Well, the men encroached until the women could only march single file, but they finished the parade. What should have taken a very short period of time wound up taking hours long, but they were determined to finish their parade, and they did. The next person I want to introduce you to is one of my most favorite suffragists. Her name is Ida B. Wells. I'm very good friends with her great-granddaughter, Michelle Duster. She marched with the Illinois delegation in that parade. She was born to enslaved parents from Holly Hills, Mississippi. She was able to learn to read and write, and she became a journalist, and her big passion was fighting against lynchings, and she was an amazing person. I've read a lot about her, and there's now even a Barbie doll that has a picture of her. I was the first person to buy it. I love this woman. She was a founder of the NAACP along with others, and her granddaughter has done a lot to keep her legacy alive in the city of Chicago, where she eventually went to live. Next, I want to introduce you to a woman who was considered the most beautiful suffragist of all. Her name is Inez Mulholland Boissevain. She was a lawyer from New York. She represented women in civil rights suits and women's unions, and she led that parade in 1913. Now, there was some controversy over whether they were going to allow African American women to participate in this parade. And Inez and her father were both members of the NAACP, and Inez told them that if they were not going to allow African Americans, she was not going to be in the parade. She told Alice Paul that, and so they changed their mind in a big hurry because she was held in such high regard among all of the women in the organization. And she later went across the country advocating for the amendment to the Constitution and for women to get the right to vote, and she went by train. She went with her sister to California, and she was speaking in Los Angeles, and she was not feeling well. She collapsed. They took her to the hospital, and she passed away 2 weeks later from pernicious anemia. It was one of those shots heard round the world for women's rights people because she was such a well-loved and great orator of the time. She was 30 years old, and she became a martyr for the organization. They held her wake in Statuary Hall on December 25th, 1916, and women came from all over the country. They gave up their Christmas with their families to be there to honor Inez and what she did. And Alice Paul asked for an audience with the president, with President Woodrow Wilson. Now, back in the day, it was very easy to get an audience with the president. You just asked, and it was yes, and you walked in, and you went in, and you had tea, and you talked to him. And Alice went with 300 of her followers in to meet with President Wilson and said, President Wilson, you have got to do something. People are dying for us to get the vote. And he was not in favor of women getting the vote, and so he said, there really isn't anything I can do. The states need to make this decision. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Well, there was something that Alice could do. You weren't going to tell Alice no and get away with it. And so on January 10th of 1917, women started picketing the White House. They picketed 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, from 10 in the morning until 6 at night. In every kind of weather, they stood there with their signs picketing for the right to vote. They were very quiet, very respectful. They stood against the background of the fence. They didn't cause any trouble. Well, as time went on, their signage got very, very nasty toward the president because he would give a speech because he wanted us to get involved in World War I. And he had made a campaign promise not to do that. But he was now trying to justify why America needed to send our boys to Germany to help them fight for democracy. Well, Alice and her followers said, well, okay, but what about democracy here in America? What about democracy for women here in America? What about women getting the vote? And so he would do a speech, and they would cut portions of his speech out, put it on the poster, and walk up and down in front of the White House. Well, he didn't like that too much. So in June, he started having the women arrested on the trumped-up charge of obstructing traffic on the sidewalk. There is no such thing. But that's what these women were being arrested. They were hauled off to court. They were told if they paid a fine, that was okay, but if they didn't pay a fine, that they were going to be jailed. Well, some of the women said, I'm not paying a fine, I didn't break any laws. Some of the women said, I'll go to jail. Well, to begin with, these ladies who were well-educated, middle and upper-class women who were involved in this started going to jail. There were some women that spent over 7 months in jail for picketing the White House. It was pretty horrific. These women were referred to as the silent sentinels, and they were as I said earlier, the very first people to ever picket peacefully in that way. I'd like to introduce you next to Lucy Burns. She was the co-founder of the National Women's Party with Alice. They met in England, and so she learned the same tactics that Alice did. She was very well educated. She was a lawyer also. And she is the woman that spent over 7 months in the Occoquan workhouse. And it was pretty amazing. She was first arrested on June 22nd, 1917. And she was there all the way through. So now I want to tell you a little story about what happened to these women that were down in the Occoquan workhouse. It's referred to as the Night of Terror, and it occurred on November 14th, 1917. There was a train that came in from D.C. with 33 women on it that had been arrested for picketing the White House. And they, as usual, when they got there, they demanded to be treated as political prisoners. They were not treated as political prisoners. They were treated as criminals. They had all their personal belongings taken away. They weren't able to talk to their lawyers. They couldn't have correspondence going in and out. It was pretty awful. And they were met on the porch of the Occoquan workhouse by the superintendent. His name was Whitaker. And he had gone down to Quantico, and he brought up Marines from Quantico. They were not in uniform. And these women were told to shut up, and he had them forcefully dragged from the wooden building across the street from the main prison. One man on either arm dragged the women across the street, and they were thrown into punishment cells. Now, these Marines did not know what they were getting themselves into, believe me. And it was pretty horrific. Women were beaten all night. Lucy Burns was shackled to one of the jail door cells like this all night long, with her feet just barely touching the floor. And she was almost dead by morning from suffocation because she couldn't breathe. So that is one more example of what somebody was willing to do for women to get the vote. And what happened was word began to leak out, because what happened to those women on the night of November 14th, 1917 was pretty awful. This hit the newspapers all across the United States. It hit the newspapers all across Europe, and it hit the desk of President Woodrow Wilson, who was responsible for having these women put in jail in the first place. And he knew it's all going to come around, follow the money kind of thing. We'll follow, who was responsible for all this. So within, immediately, the women that were down in Occoquan were transferred to the D.C. prison. And then by the end of November, all of the women had been released from jail. But they were not happy, and this was not over. So in January of 1918, Woodrow Wilson went to Congress and said, I've been thinking, and maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea for women to get the vote. After all, we've been engaged in World War I. And what he said next was really true. He said, women have been over there, during these battles. The nurses have been taking excellent care of our soldiers who have been wounded. They have done a tremendous job, and I think that we need to consider that. The House voted immediately to pass the amendment. That was in January of 1918. But the Senate, which hasn't changed a whole lot, did not vote for it. And it came up for vote again and again and again. And I have a picture of the women being released. When these women were released, they were taken to the courthouse, and some of them were so weak they could barely even lay down on the benches in the courthouse. They were just so weak from what had happened to them. So this is what I call the finish line. On January 9th, he addressed Congress, and that was 6 weeks after the women had been released. So I think that the night of terror had a lot to do with it. So you have heard that I was the CEO of the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial. And our memorial is built in Occoquan Regional Park, which is part of those prison grounds. And the name of the memorial is the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial, because the Night of Terror became a turning point after 70 years of us trying to get the vote for women. So that's where the name of our memorial comes from. Finally, in June of 1919, both houses of Congress passed the 19th Amendment on June 4th, and it then had to go to the states for ratification. They needed 36 states to ratify, and Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify. Now, I will tell you, that's a southern state, and there were a lot of people that were elected officials, and they weren't so sure that they wanted to be the state that pushed voting for women, you know, over the mark. And so there was a group of them that left the state, so they didn't have a quorum. They had to eventually come back. Everybody who was anybody that had a dog in this fight showed up in Tennessee. Carrie Chapman Catt was there. Carrie's organization, the reason that she was able to start the League of Women Voters is because she had one of her supporters pass away and left her what would be the equivalent of $50 million in today's money. So she was able to have offices in every single state, and she turned those offices into the League of Women Voters. Poor Alice didn't have anybody die and leave her anything. So Alice remained in Washington, and she's still working the phones, trying to get money. She had her people down there. You know, they were there, and they were in session when the group went into session for this, for the vote. And when it was time for the vote and the legislators marched in, if they were in favor of the vote, they were wearing a yellow rose. If they were opposed to the vote, they were wearing a red rose. And so Alice's women were up in the balcony and they're counting heads. Alice, we don't have the vote. This isn't going to happen. Well, they started taking the vote, and there was a young legislator by the name of Harry Byrne. I've seen pictures of him. He's really cute. And he had a red rose on. And he was 26 years old, and he kind of just took that red rose off and kind of laid it on the table. And when it came time for him to vote, it was, are you in favor of it? And he voted aye. Well, when they got to the end and they did the vote, that one vote pushed it over, and Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment. Now, why did Harry do that? Harry had gotten a letter from his mother the day before, and she said, Harry, I have been watching you to see what it is you're going to do. And she says, I'm not quite sure, but I think you need to help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification, and that is exactly what he did. And so then it went back to Washington, and the 19th Amendment was certified on August 26, 1920. So on August 26, we will be celebrating the 102nd anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So this is what the 19th Amendment says. It says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Notice this backhanded way of saying women get the vote, because up until this amendment passing, women were never mentioned in the Constitution anywhere. This is where they kind of in a backhanded way were mentioned. But not all women got the vote in 1920. First of all, you had to be a citizen. And states have the primary responsibility for and control over elections. So Native Americans, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Latina suffragists had to fight for enfranchisement long after the 19th Amendment was ratified. Now, having said that, African American women, excuse me, were citizens. The problem is the majority of them were still living in the South, and there were Jim Crow laws that didn't allow them to vote because of what the state regulations were. So those women, we're going to take a deeper look here about when other women got the vote. But if you look down to 1965 and the passage of the Voting Rights Act, that's when African American women truly got the vote. But Native Americans were not citizens, so those women and men were not allowed to vote until 1924. Asian American women in 1952. And little by little, things came around. But then the Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, threw another wrench in the works, because part of the 1965 Voting Act said that if you were a state that had discriminated against voters because of any reason, but certainly race was one, if you want to have any further changes to your voting in your state, you have to bring it before us to let us look at it to say whether it's okay or not. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was jumping up and down, screaming and yelling and saying, don't take that out. The Supreme Court conservatives were saying, well, we don't need it anymore. We don't have this problem. And she said, that's because it's part of this law. Don't change it. And they changed it. And since then, states have continuously enacted more laws to discriminate against voting rights. And after this last election, there were over 400 bills that were introduced into various states across the country, many of which were passed that affected voting rights for people. So it's not over. So my organization thought that these 5 million women that you never heard of, who fought for more than 7 decades to get the vote, deserve to be remembered. And that's where our organization, the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial Association, came into play to erect a memorial to recognize what these women did. And this is, this memorial is a virtual symbol and an educational tool to kind of elevate these 5 million unknown women to their proper place in history, and that's what we wanted to achieve. This is an aerial view of the, memorial. It cost $3.3 million to build, which for a national memorial is chump change, because most national memorials start at about $25 million, for like one little thing, and goes up. But we got a lot of in-kind donations as well. We have 3 statues that were donated to us by the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission that was established by Congress in 2017. The purpose of which, for that Congress, was to let America know about the suffrage movement, and that 1920 was the 100-year anniversary, because many women in Congress recognized that hardly anyone appreciated that. So Pat Worth went to every meeting that they had asking for money, and they very nicely paid to have these statues built for us. Of Mary Church Terrell, she worked with the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. I told you and introduced you to Carrie Chapman Catt and to Alice Paul. And then the woman who was the chairperson of the commission worked for the Department of Interior. And I had, I had seen in the paper that once again they were changing the fence around the White House, because they just make it higher and higher and higher so nobody can get over it. And I said, I asked, do you think there's any chance that I could get a piece of that fence? Well, she made it her purpose in life to get me a 24-foot section of the White House fence in front of which these women picketed. Now, the National Park Service maintains everything in the White House as if it were a museum. Like, every section of fence has a number and where it is located. And I mean, you have to treat everything like it's a sacred artifact. And so we got this section of fence, and it was free, but it was going to cost $100,000 to erect it. So the Women's Commission gave us another $100,000 for that. And the plaque that you can sort of see in the picture has a picture of women from New York State wearing rain slickers. It was raining that day, that are picketing in front of the White House at a fence. And it's the exact fence that you see in our memorial. So it's really, really quite amazing. And that is my presentation. I hope you learned a few things today that you didn't know about before. I think, once again, this is an unknown piece of history that I just like to share with a lot of other people. We should never take our freedom for granted. We should never take our voting rights for granted. If you are not registered to vote, do not talk to me, because you need to get registered and you need to vote. I don't care who you vote for. That's your personal thing, but you need to exercise your constitutional right and get out there and vote. Thank you very much.
Chief Cousset, would you please join us for the presentation to Ms. Worth? Thank you. Got it? Oh, sorry. Just like to make it more fun for you.
Yeah.
But I throw you a curveball.
Previously untouched by human hands.
That's right. COVID-free. The Pentagon Force Protection Agency awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Patricia Depew Worth in recognition of your valuable contribution as a guest speaker for the Women's Equality Day observance on this 17th day of August 2022. Thank you, Ms. Worth. That's it. Thank you so much. Oh, the coin.
Military tradition to challenge coins. Mr. Sample? Oh, wait, there's more.
If I look like a little kid on Christmas, it's because I feel that.
Thank you so much. Can you get your stuff?
This was great.
Great. Thank you so much. Supervisory Special Agent Yolanda Lockamy has been with PFPA for 16 years. She is from Zebulon, North Carolina, and is a graduate of Howard University. SSA Lockamy is the first black female supervisory special agent in PFPA. She currently leads the Special Events Unit as the special agent in charge. Special Agent Lockamy, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Couldn't hear you. All right. Thank you, distinguished panel, special guest, Ms. Worth, and everyone who took the time out of your busy schedule to acknowledge women and to understand the need to discuss women's equality, where we were, how we've made significant strides, and more importantly, where we're headed. As we near the end of our program, I'd like to say thank you to our PFPA leaders and to the Mission Integration Directorate for coordinating and promoting this much-needed forum. PFPA is a unique law enforcement organization with a mission unlike any other. We have made tremendous strides and advances over the past 20-plus years. We pride ourselves on being innovative and a trailblazer for security, protection, and law enforcement. We've even revised our strategic plan to focus on creating a culture of high performance, diversity, trust, and resilience. That's an awesome start. But let's continue to shatter the ceiling of disparity that subtly looms here. Now is the time to usher in true women's equality. Equality for those who wear the badge and for those who support those who wear the badge. I don't believe women's equality can come into fruition simply by creating federal, state, local, or agency policies. Legislation, policies, they serve their place, and they serve as a baseline and merely suggest to us to do the right thing even when no one's watching. However, true equality will only occur when we as individuals make a conscious effort to change our thoughts and more importantly, change our hearts about what it means to have equality. We cannot continuously infuse our minds with antiquated philosophies and doctrines if we truly aspire for PFPA to be at the top of the spear and deemed a progressive and inclusive law enforcement agency, unless men and women are considered and promoted to major leadership positions. We need to appoint men and women who are even more creative, innovative, intelligent, especially since diversity has become one of our mantras. We're getting there. Our director has been very supportive when it comes to inclusivity. Hopefully his vision will organically become our vision. In 1851, Sojourner Truth spoke at the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio. She asked one simple question: "Ain't I a woman?" Her words were poignant and called for everyone to revisit their view of women and our quest for equal rights. Ironically, Miss Truth could recite the same speech today, for it would have just as much relevance now as it did then. As women's rights are being threatened today and people are moonwalking to past views instead of embracing the future, I want to sound an alarm to my PFPA colleagues. Today is a call to action. Gentlemen, you will always be an integral part of this agency. Women's equality does not mean we want to dominate, nor does it mean we want to dim your lights. Instead, we want to partner with you, be a part of the decision-making process, and provide our points of view on topics that impact us and our colleagues. We want to encourage you to be the best versions of yourselves, for only then will you feel comfortable enough to trust us and see us as valued assets. Remember, you are never deprived when someone else gains. Ladies, being a woman in law enforcement is not easy. If and when you're placed in a position of leadership and you have a seat at the table, don't compromise your views and your values. Be a blessing and an advocate for your team, even when it's not popular. Teach, uplift, and inspire them. When things get tough, call upon your circle of influence to hold you accountable and to encourage you to have that Beyonce, "You won't break my soul" spirit that will propel you beyond your fears and frustrations into a revered leader who contributes to this agency's growth and evolution. I've been in this field for 27 and a half years. The biggest thrill has not been the countless cases worked, but the lives touched by being a supervisor and a woman. As a woman in leadership, I want my team to be better than I am, smarter than I am, and find their life's purpose. Why, you ask? Because they can then be better partners at home, better parents to their children, and thus be better agents when they put on that gun and that badge and they walk into this building. My goal has always been to leave a legacy of no excuses, exhibit excellence, integrity, and an unrelenting work ethic that inspires others. I hope I've accomplished that. To our leadership, I encourage you to look at the supervisors in your next meetings and for the next few weeks. If most of those people in those meetings look like you, ask yourself if that is a true representation of this agency. If not, what adjustments can we make? Studies have shown that a more balanced workplace equates to a more productive organization with a happier workforce and great retention. PFPA, our time is now. Right now, women's rights are being re-evaluated. This is simply another example of power and privilege going unnoticed by those who already have it. It tends to remain invisible, and more times than not, leads to very uncomfortable yet necessary conversations. However, today is a new day. We must be transformed by the renewal of our minds and embrace the inevitability of change. We need women directors here at PFPA. More women managers here at PFPA. And how about some women chiefs of police here at PFPA? Not just because they're women, but because their presence will also spawn new, fresh perspectives and ideas and launch us into another dimension within the law enforcement community and throughout the federal government. Women leaders will also enhance morale and show others that there are no limits when you put in the work. It is time for more women to be viewed and rewarded as equal partners. The women in this agency, we're ready. The question is, are you? Thank you. At this time, we would like to play a short video to celebrate the women's movement through history, as well as celebrate some of the women of the PFPA to recognize them for their contributions in supporting the PFPA mission.
Women's Equality Day commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, granting the right to vote to women. Black women would wait nearly 5 decades more to actually exercise that right when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. In 1971, the U.S. Congress designated August 26 as Women's Equality Day.
From 1854, with the hiring of the first police matrons of New York City, to 2007, with the hiring of the first woman police chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, Ms. Kathy Lemire, women have had to overcome decades of obstacles to get to where they are today.
It's been 50 years since the appointment of women as special agents. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had a firm rule: only men could be special agents in the FBI. But that rule changed shortly after his death in May 1972, paving the way for the first female modern special agent.
Many important women have made groundbreaking discoveries in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These women are experts in their field and contribute to the success of their organization and the institution. They are educated professionals who defy constraints, rose to the top of their organization, and accomplish great things.
While security is not a sector that many women have traditionally considered to build their careers, the landscape has shifted dramatically. It has been an evolution rather than a revolution that has attracted a diverse population of employees who now serve as security professionals.
Women's equality has been critical to our success in what we have accomplished and will accomplish as a nation, a department, and as an agency. When women are empowered, they make an enormous impact on the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Special Agent Lockamy. That was really phenomenal. Thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to introduce our final speaker for today, Pentagon Force Protection Agency's Executive Director for Law Enforcement, Mr. Chris Bardry.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Hey, thanks for being here today. What a super day, and I'm really got 2 things on my mind today. One of them is, that I'm very proud and very grateful. So I'll keep my remarks pretty short. But first thing I want to do is thank a few people. Thanks, Ms. Worth. I don't think we could have had a better speaker I don't know how our agency was so lucky to land you to come in here and talk about this subject. And you did teach us. And not only did you teach and inform us, but you did inspire us. And I think there were dozens of lessons in everything that you shared with us today. It certainly inspired me to want to go down to the memorial and see it for myself. I don't actually live very far from there. I did notice that I think it was maybe Fairfax County or something. There was a new symbol that came out recently for our area, and that symbol actually incorporated a piece of your monument and your accomplishment. Thank you for that accomplishment, and thank you for being part of our family here today. Thank you very much. Thanks to Special Agent Lockamy. She's right. We are moving forward. I'm not sure, but she may be asking us to step on the gas a little bit. I'm not sure about that. But Yolanda, you always lead and inspire in a wonderful way. You're quiet most of the time. And then some days you're not, like today. But you know what? That was a wonderful speech. So well presented and so full of truth. And thank you so much for that. Thank you, Yolanda. I want to thank the folks from MID, the Mission Integration Directorate, who put this on. Thank you to all you guys for putting it on. And I'm very grateful that our agency values these types of events. I think, not only do we learn and not only does it hold our interest and kind of pull us, I think it actually pulls us together closer as a family, because it's good for us to step back and be introspective and look into the fabric of who we are and what we're actually doing. And it's good to be able to bring people in to stimulate thought. And if Yolanda gets her way, stimulate action, so that we're actually taking action on the things that matter and on the things that we speak to, even in our strategic plan. I think these things are healthy for us as a family and an organization, and I know we're going to keep doing those. It's a high priority for us. And so, in honor of the 19th Amendment, I just have 19 more things that I'm grateful for. Not really, I'm just kidding. But I think our agency is being purposeful in what we're doing in recruiting and developing women within our ranks. And we know that it's extremely difficult for some reason, it's extremely difficult to pull women into law enforcement related careers, and then to retain them. Even more difficult. But this is something that our agency, our director, has set the tone, he has set the vision, he has set the path, and this is something we're committed to. So you will see us continue to do that. And I'm proud of that. And I'm thankful for a few things today. One, I'm very thankful for the suffragists who campaigned and struggled for the right to vote, and for opening those doors. And we were given today a vision of how that happened. And I think many of us, I know I was very surprised to see what it took to get it done, how long it took to get it done, the sacrifice it took to make it happen. But one thing that I certainly take away from it is that a person and individual people can make a difference. You can make a difference. Yolanda speaks to us today to say, make a difference, and I think it's overused phrase, but sometimes it starts with you, starts with us. We see these heroes on the screens who actually put everything out there to make a difference. I am thankful for them because of the way it changed our nation and the doors that it opened. And I pray that we'll continue to open doors, such doors. I'm extremely thankful for my own suffragist, who probably would never say she was one. That was my mother. So I saw my mother who, came along. She was always my example and probably the most influential person in my life, because I watched her work hard, coming from meager beginnings, humble beginnings, to become a small business owner, and then to use that, to turn around and use that to help other people in a very small county, in a very rural place. She made a difference like that, and she helped a lot of people in what she did in small businesses. And she was never born into that, but she did it. And I think I see that in the sacrifice and the struggle and the fire that some of these ladies that we looked at today, and I recognize that in my own family. I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful for the senior leaders, the women that I have worked for in my career. Several of them have been very influential in developing me over my, I would say, 34 years of service to the country. I've worked for a couple of female senior leaders who never would have been there if not for everything that we saw today, and if not for calls to action like we heard today. I could tell you, I'm recommitted to getting back in touch with one of them who, man, when I was at a crucial point in my career, very early, actually moved some obstacles out of the way for me they were big obstacles, and she took a lot of risk to get me through those. I would not be standing here today if not for that lady. So I'm inspired to reconnect with her, and again, thankful for those women that I've worked for in the military and in the government service. And last but not least, I am thankful because I have 3 daughters. I have one son, 3 daughters, and 1 granddaughter. So days like today, refocusing on activities and refocusing on subject matter like we looked at today that deal with people. And I think that's so very important for us in what we do as an agency, because that's what we do. We deal with people. We deal with hard challenges, and we deal with all kinds of people. And our agency's made up of a very diverse fabric. And so I am grateful and thankful that my daughters will have opportunities that, as we learned today, may not have been afforded them if not for trailblazers. And I'm happy we have trailblazers here in PFPA too. I hope that everyone in this room will continue to trailblaze for good causes like this. And we celebrate this progress, and today we renew our commitment to ensuring equal rights for women and for all Americans. So thank you all for what you do. Thank you, guests, for being here with us today. And we walk away re-inspired by who we are and what we can do. And we work as one team to do it. Individuals, but all together, we're one family, and we're one agency, and we're one team. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bargery. Before we conclude, there are a few people I'd like to thank for this wonderful event today. As you've already heard, PIFPA's Mission Integration Directorate was responsible for today's observance, and they have now set a very high bar. So all the other directorates have a lot to live up to. I'm looking at Kusei, a couple other people. From Mission Integration, Tanya Scott, Iris Anderson, Karen White, Pablo Lorenzo, Carol Jackson, Heather Harris, Jewel Buckman, Julie Bigler, Eric McVicker, and the Acting Assistant Director for Mission Integration, Tom Donati. From the PIFPA Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Group, Yolanda Godfrey and Carla Harris. And from the front office, although she's not here today, she provided all the sort of expertise on how this is supposed to go. That's Jackie Mendez. Thank you all for all of your hard work in pulling this together. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's ceremony. Thank you all for attending. Please rise for the departure of the official party. All right. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for coming.